Thank you, Juliet. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session where we're going to look at top tips for effective and successful recruitment. In reality, I don't know whether it's so much top tips as more about steps for you to follow, but we'll work as we go along. So I don't think it would be any surprise for anybody to know that employing good people that work hard and stay with you can be really tricky, and even the best can get it wrong. So today I'm hoping to give you some skills and tips to give yourself the best opportunity to be successful in recruitment. SMEs today face real challenges. You are competing against some of the largest organisations in the country who will be clearly paying and able to pay much higher salaries, have better benefit programmes, and for some be perceived as a much safer option to work for. I think it's important, though, to recognise the benefit of working for SMEs, and they can be countless. Firstly, the flexibility is much greater for employees. There's much better communication across the workforce and a real opportunity for people wanting to join a growing company and learn a much greater and wider range of skills. So we really should be proud to be SMEs and really focus on the opportunities that we provide for potential new employees. But if you are out there and you are a one-man band and you don't employ anybody right now, well, you're not alone. 76% of businesses don't employ anyone aside from the business owner. So what can we do to be more effective when recruiting new employees? And this is as much about sales as it is HR, and I'll explain as we go along. The good news, though, is that companies that employ staff are 3 times more likely to be successful. So moving on to tip 1, really this is about thinking before you start. So do you really need to recruit? What is the problem that you're trying to fix? Is it that you are just too busy and you need an extra pair of hands to take some of your workload? Is it that you're trying to increase your sales activity or increase your customer services? But it's too easy just to think I've got a problem and the fix for that is to just bring somebody in. So I think the best idea is to start with the end in mind. So what do you want the result to be as a result of recruiting somebody? So what do you want to achieve? Is it higher sales figures? Is it better customer service? Is it more time for you? And if you start with that and then work backwards, you're more likely to get what you wanted. There are some things, though, to consider before we get started. And the first of those is cost. So when you think about cost, you really need to think about the physical cost of you bringing somebody on and recruiting them. And that can range depending on the way that you bring somebody into your business. But you also need to think about the cost of equipment that you might need for somebody, the cost of training to bring somebody up to speed, and equally the cost of a lack of productivity, because your time is going to be spent bringing somebody on. And while you're doing that, you're not generating sales into your business. That brings me nicely on to time. So your time is critical. The reason you're looking to recruit, no doubt, is that you're incredibly busy, but you do need to find and make the time to follow the process to make sure that you get the right person for your business. You also need to think about the timing for your business. So if you recruit too early, you run the risk of having a negative impact on your cash flow, but not necessarily seeing the results in terms of increased sales. If you leave it too late, there's a real risk that you don't service your customers as you should be, and you start to lose customers and dent your reputation. So making sure that you recruit people at the right time is absolutely critical for you. You also need to think about the legal implications. If you're employing somebody for the first time, then there are a number of things that you need to put in place. And in any event, even if you've already got a large workforce, there are still legal implications for you to consider, such as discrimination when you're employing somebody, and we'll talk about that in a few slides' time. Finally, you need to think about space. So if you are going to bring somebody into your business, where are you going to physically put them? Do you have space? Does it mean that you might need to expand your business premises? If you work from home yourself, is there an expectation that somebody joining your business may well do the same thing? And how will you manage that? So lots of things for you to consider before you even get to the recruitment stage. Finally, we need to think about how you can maximise your opportunity. And I said a few moments ago that this is as much about sales as it is about HR. So here's the good news. Your business is expanding, you're taking on new employees. And so often I see employers recruit new staff under the radar. So there's a real opportunity for you here to get out onto social media, get out into your local papers and tell people that you're expanding and increase sales at the same time as find great employees. So tip two, get the basics in place. So if you are recruiting somebody for the first time, there are a number of things that you need to do. Firstly, you need to have employer's liability insurance. And employer's liability insurance will help you to pay compensation to your employee if they become sick or injured as a result of the job that they do. It's a legal requirement for you to have it, and you must have a minimum of £5 million worth of cover. It must be provided by an authorised insurer. Now, if you don't have it, you are likely to face hefty fines. So for not having employer liability insurance in place, you face a fine of £2,500. If you do have it, but you're not displaying your certificate and you can't produce it when asked, then you may face a further fine of another £1,000. So it's really important that you get it in place. The second thing you need to do is register with HMRC as an employer. Now, there is a time window for you to be able to do this. You can't register any more than 2 months in advance, but you must register before the first payday of your employee. You can do it online, and it takes up to 2 weeks to go through the process. So think about when you're going to be bringing somebody on and paying them for the first time, work backwards and make sure that you get registered. You may or may not need a PAYE scheme in place, depending on how much you're going to pay your employee. So if you're paying less than the taxation bracket of £112 a week or the national insurance bracket of £155 a week, all you'll need to have is a documented process and system for paying your employees. If you pay above that, then you will need to make deductions and declare that to HMRC and pay it to them in the following month that you make the deduction. And to do that, you'll need a proper PAYE system. It's likely that your accountant will have some information or can possibly offer that service to you. So first port of call is to ask your accountant. Failing that, I'm sure that the Business Hub here can give you some more information on finding a payroll provider. In terms of health and safety, you do need, under the Health and Safety at Work Act, to put certain things in place. The first thing is that you must have a written health and safety statement and a written policy. If your employees require it, you need to provide them with the appropriate protective equipment and clothing that they may need to do their job. And you do need to supply adequate welfare facilities such as toilet, drinking water and somewhere to wash. Finally, you do need to provide them with training. So if you're expecting them to work on machinery or carry heavy equipment or anything like that, then you do need to give them training and you need to document it and keep it on the employee file. Finally, the last thing to think about is your pension implications. So you may need to auto-enroll and set up a pension scheme for any employee, providing they meet the threshold. I can provide you more information on the thresholds if you need it, but if you go to gov.uk, you'll find all the information that you need there. Number 3, and this for me is probably the most important thing that you should do through the whole process, and that's to create and write a clear job description for your potential employee. A job description forms the basis for everything that you'll do. It provides you with a narrative for your advert, helps you bring the job to life. It allows applicants to understand the job role. This isn't just about you requiring somebody. You need somebody to pick the role that you've got on offer and see that it's relevant for them. It will help to clarify expectations. And quite often I see employers who've had somebody in the business for a couple of months and they say, this just isn't working out. They're not doing what I expected them to do. And when I ask, what did you expect them to do? Then they're not really very clear, but they just know that they're disappointed. So I think it's very important for you to be able to have that in place so that everybody knows what they're working towards. And of course, it provides a basis for you to be able to manage and develop employees moving forward. How can you possibly, after 2 or 3 months, say that somebody isn't doing their job well if they're not clear about what their job actually involves? It's very simple to write a job description and shouldn't take up too much of your time, but you do need to give yourself a bit of time and space uninterrupted to sit down and think about what it is you need. So a quick how-to of how to write a job description. First, start off by listing all of the tasks that you want your new employee to do. Then combine all of those tasks into common themes and then rank them, starting with the most important at the top, leaving the least important items to the bottom. I'd always recommend use doing words, so you will be managing. you will be communicating, you will be creating, because that helps people see the job and helps it come to life for them. Be really careful, though, that you don't make the brief just too wide for somebody to be able to do. It's unlikely that you'll find somebody who can do your bookkeeping, deliver parcels, clean the warehouse, and put together a marketing plan all at the same time. So really think about what are the jobs that you want somebody else to do. Be clear that you don't discriminate when you're putting the job description together, and think about what you want somebody to do today, but also what you might want them to do in the future. Finally, I would always recommend that you ask somebody to review it, either somebody who knows your business or somebody who does a very similar role. It's very easy for you to get carried away when putting a job description together, but if you get somebody else to review it and ask you some questions about it, it'll help you take out the things that you really don't need. And last but not least, be realistic. So tip number 4 is about creating a plan. And you'll see on the table on the chart that I've put together some timescales for you. If you were looking to recruit somebody right now, the first thing you'd need to do is create your job description. Now, bearing in mind, you're all very busy. You probably haven't lots of time to be able to put this together very quickly. So it's likely to take you a few days to create that. The next thing is you'll need to place the advert. You'll need to allow time for applications, and that might involve appointing a recruitment agent. It might mean you researching the social media channels or job boards that you want to post your vacancy on. And allowing time for applications, you probably need to allow 2 to 3 weeks. You then need some time to review your applicants' CVs to decide how you're going to take it forward, and then likely interview candidates. Once you've created then all of the requirements that you need to do and made a decision to offer the job and wait for them to be available for you, it's likely that the whole process could take anywhere between 12 to 13 weeks. So if you're thinking of having somebody in your business in possibly April or May time, you really should be starting the process now. A couple of things to think about here is you really need to think about how you are going to attract candidates to your role. And you need to make some decisions about whether the right thing to do is go through a recruitment agent or whether you're going to advertise on a job board or on social media. But also think here about this is a window into your business, and it works 2 ways. So as much as somebody potentially looking to apply for a role with you might be looking at your business and you're looking at their CV. So the other thing to think about then is your website. So if somebody's looking to join you and they put your website up, are they seeing a professional website? Is it out of date? Is it a bit tired? Are there mistakes on it? And what does that website say about you as a potential employer? The other area to consider are your own profiles on things like LinkedIn and Facebook. So if those profiles are open to the public, then everybody can see your personal life as well as your private life, your business life. And for me, it's something that I always look at just to see the sorts of people that are coming in for the roles that I've got available. So if your Facebook profile shows you flat on your back in the street in Malaga after a good night out, you probably want to make your profile private, or you probably want to think about what those posts say about you as a potential employer. So tip number 5, design your selection process and think about what it is that you want to achieve and do. So the diagrams here give you some examples of some of the most popular selection processes available today. So starting in the top left-hand corner, we talk here about assessment centres. Assessment centres broadly are where you bring in a group of applicants and you set them a series of tasks to work through together. You then sit back and monitor their behaviours to see such things as how well they work as part of a team, what their natural leadership skills look like, how competitive they are, how tolerant of others they are. And it's a really good exercise to see people in a real life situation. I wouldn't recommend that you run an assessment centre by yourself. Get somebody in to do it for you, because you don't want to be running around running the thing. You want to be able to sit back and observe your applicants. The second thing is a free trial, and free trials are quite useful if somebody is returning from long-term unemployment, returning to work after a career break. It's a good opportunity for both of you to test each other. So either you're testing their skill and at the same time they've got an opportunity to see what your work environment is like. It tends to work really well in hospitality and in retail, because you really get an opportunity to see people in the front, on the front line. The next thing then to think about is testing, whether that be a psychometric test of character or whether it's something more basic, such as basic English or maths. So again, going back to your job description and really thinking about what you want people to do, your next question has to be, how can I get those people to prove to me that they've got the skills that I'm looking for? And so testing can be a very useful way of clarifying what people have and haven't got. The next thing to do is to potentially look to interview your candidates. And interviews, whilst they remain still the most popular way of reviewing somebody for a job, can be fraught with problems. If you're not prepared for your interview and you don't ask relevant questions, then potentially they could be a complete waste of time. And we'll talk about that in a second. Finally, there's some other things that you potentially could look to do. So you could take up references. I would be fairly guarded with references because nobody's going to give you a referee that's going to say something negative about them. References, though, are good for checking against a CV for career background and dates, etc. The other thing you might get them to do is something like a presentation, and that's always useful to test a variety of skills, such as how well did they understand your brief? Are they capable of going away and researching a subject? Are they then capable of putting that together into some kind of communication back to you? And how comfortable do they feel when presenting to larger groups? So there's some real skill that you can get from getting somebody to do a presentation. The answer really, though, is there's no one right way to select, and I'd always recommend that you use a range of techniques to establish the skill base that you're looking for in your applicant. Tip 6, ask less questions, but do it really well. So I'd strongly recommend that when you're interviewing somebody is to create a question template. So what you need to do is pick 2 or 3 questions that are the most relevant to the skills that you're looking for. Too many times I see a long list of questions that interviewers ask the candidates, and all they're doing is answering yes or no, and that really doesn't tell you anything about the skills that you're looking for. So think of 2 or 3 killer questions that you might want to ask, and ask them to respond based on real life work experience and use real examples of what they've done to be able to bring their answer to life. Create a scoring sheet and score them against the questions as to how well they answered it, how well they were able to give you clear examples, and how relevant it was to the role. At the end of each of the interviews, tot up the scores, and when you finished interviewing all the candidates, logically the candidate with the highest score should be the one that best matches your skills requirements. If you get 2 candidates that score very closely together, you can then look at who might be the best fit for the team, or who you have a personal preference for in terms of the similar outlook to you. But certainly you do need to have some kind of objective way of comparing candidates from each other. Make sure you ask the same questions of everybody. You can't possibly compare one candidate against another if you're asking them an entirely different set of questions. And make professional notes against each of the candidates' information. You will need to keep those notes, and general rule of thumb is that you should keep notes in a secure location for up to 6 months. A candidate coming for an interview is perfectly entitled to ask you for a copy of the notes that you've made and ask for some feedback. So do be prepared to provide that feedback, and also be cautious of what you're writing down, as you will need to potentially provide that information back to a candidate if they ask. Please don't make the interview just a tick box exercise. Really explore each candidate's skill set and base your decisions on fact rather than any assumptions that you might make during the interview. Tip 7 is all about avoiding pitfalls, and you'll see that there's a number of pictures that hopefully give you some examples of the sorts of pitfalls that you could potentially fall into. Our first one is a lady who is just about to interview for a candidate, has realised that her candidate has arrived and she's completely forgotten. She hasn't set the time aside properly, her desk is a mess, and she is not prepared for the interview at all. So please do bear in mind that when somebody comes for an interview with you, they're putting their time and effort to one side to come to see you. You should equally follow the same for them. So please be organised, make sure that your desk is tidy, please make sure that CVs of other candidates aren't lying around, and make sure that you've got an appropriate place to conduct the interview where you're going to be undisturbed. Our next picture is all about the like me potential here. So you meet somebody, they come in for an interview, and you realise that you've got a very similar background. So it may be that you went to the same school, you support the same football club, you've got the same general hobbies and interests. And so you allow that then to cloud your judgment of that individual. So you've got to be really careful that despite whether or not you like the candidate, what you're really looking for is their skills and ability to be able to do the job. Our third one is a very bad example of me using Father Christmas, but this really is all about stereotyping. So we all in life make sweeping judgments about somebody based on our perception of that particular group or of individuals. I once worked for a company where it's a very small family-run business, where the husband's, the owner's wife of the business wouldn't recruit from a certain estate in Oxford because she felt that candidates coming from that estate were more likely to have a criminal background, were more likely to being moved from social, and more likely to be unreliable. And that is a real clear example of stereotyping a group based on where they live. So don't make any assumptions, and please review everybody on their own merits rather than the type of group that they come from. Our next picture denotes two things. The first one is self-fulfilling prophecy, and the second is being judgmental. So the man in the picture clearly has got an issue with the lady that he's interviewing. He's already made a judgment about her that she's not right for the role. And so what he's doing now is he's going to ask lots of questions that just validate the decision that he's already made. That's not sensible, and it's not the right thing to do for the candidate. They will leave the interview feeling that this is an organisation that they don't want to work for, and are likely to tell their friends and family that they've had a very poor experience, which will put you in a very bad light. So do make sure that you are very clear, friendly, but that you're asking the relevant and right questions of your candidates. The next one really denotes that this is not an interrogation. So please be challenging, challenge questions, challenge thought processes. Quite often by asking 2 or 3 questions about the same thing, you'll get to the real bottom of what somebody actually did in a certain situation. But do that in a way that's not intimidating. And finally, this isn't a public display. This is a private and confidential conversation between you and your candidate. So if you come out of an interview and say to the rest of your team, well, you won't believe what they just told me, then that's not really respecting their confidence. So you do need to make sure that the information that you glean from somebody during an interview remains confidential and between you, unless it's absolutely relevant for you to share it. And equally, the documentation that you produce through the interview needs to be kept and secured for 6 months in a safe location. Tip 8 is very important that you keep within the law. So the Equality Act 2010 sets out a number of areas where individuals can enjoy protection against discrimination. And these are called the protected characteristics. And you'll see here we list down the areas where if you discriminate against somebody, it would automatically be unfair against the Equality Act. There are 4 types of discrimination that you could fall foul of. The first is direct discrimination. Direct discrimination occurs when you discriminate directly against the individual. So if you fail to ask somebody coming for interview whether or not they require any reasonable adjustments, you could potentially fall foul. If you do ask them and they tell you that they are arriving in a wheelchair and you interview on the 3rd floor and there's no lift, then again, that would be classed as direct discrimination. The second area is indirect discrimination, and this is where you discriminate against a group because of the way that you're recruiting into your business. An example of that might be having a very clear criteria that applicants must be age over 25. Unless you can generally validate why the age is relevant, and it might be for insurance purposes, you would be discriminating against younger people, and so you would be discriminating on the basis of age. The next area for discrimination would be discrimination by association. And this is where you discriminate against somebody because they're associated with somebody who has and demonstrates one of the protected characteristics. An example of that might be that you want to recruit somebody into your business, but during the interview process, they tell you that they're a carer for their disabled parent. If you then decide not to recruit that individual on that basis, you would be discriminating by association. And finally, you can be discriminating by perception. And this is where you have a perception that somebody may have one of the protected characteristics demonstrated. So as an example, a man comes for an interview and his mannerisms are, in your opinion, quite effeminate. You make a sweeping decision that that man is clearly homosexual as a result of the way that he acts, and you then make a decision not to recruit him on the basis of his homosexuality. That and clearly he isn't. That would be discrimination by perception. I hope that makes sense. It's also unlawful for you to reject an applicant based on trade union membership or for any spent criminal convictions. So if somebody does have a criminal record, their convictions will either be spent or unspent. If they have a conviction that is unspent and you ask them, then they must declare that unspent conviction to you. If you don't ask them, then there is no legal requirement for them to offer that information. But once a criminal conviction is spent, that means its time has passed, then that cannot be declared and cannot be taken into consideration. Even with an unspent conviction, you may want to consider whether that conviction is relevant to the role that you're employing. It may well be that here's somebody who's looking to get back into work and is constantly battling with that unspent conviction being a judgment against them. It may well be, therefore, that that employee could well be somebody who's very loyal to you and gives you more than 100% because you've put your faith in them. So really think about whether that unspent conviction is relevant to the role or not. Finally, you will need to think about right to work in the UK. The Immigration Act 2016 requires all employers to check the right to work of any employee in their care. Failure to do that could result in 2 to 5 years imprisonment for you as the business owner, and could also result in a £20,000 fine per worker. So it's really important that you get that done. In order to check right to work, you need to keep a copy of the applicant's birth certificate or passport or leave to remain document, and also their national insurance number. But please don't just ask for a national insurance number and jot it down. The national insurance number needs to be on a formal document, such as a letter from HMRC or their national insurance card. You may well have other right to work questions and validations that you need to make, such as if an individual is working with children or vulnerable adults, you may need to do some greater checks, such as data disclosure. And again, you need to allow time for those things to take place. So tip 9 is always issue a contract. Now, technically, once an offer is made and accepted verbally, a legal agreement is made and there is therefore a contract of employment in place. Now, an example of where that may not happen may be that you offer somebody a job and you say, this is the salary I'm going to pay you, this is the number of hours a week, and this is the number of holidays. And they come back and they say, well, I'd like to accept the offer of the job, but I would like to change the working hours that you've asked me to complete. That is not a contract of employment. That means that they've rejected your initial offer. You would then make a counter offer, and once they accepted that, then a contract would be in place. But you must supply a written statement of terms within 2 months of employment. And those written terms must include a number of areas, some of which I've detailed here, but there are a couple of other areas on top. You also need to give more information about sick leave and sick pay arrangements, disciplinary grievance and appeals procedure, and pensions. They don't necessarily have to be in the initial statement, but they do need to be documented and provided and signposted to the applicant and the new employee. I would always recommend that you have an employment handbook. The purpose of an employment handbook is to set expectations, and it really tells people this is the way we work around here. It would cover such things as how you manage data, internet access, breaks, smoking, maternity, paternity leave, how you would help in terms of dependents. So a number of things, how you expect them to dress, how you expect them to treat your customers. And it really does protect your business and help you both have a very level playing field on which to play. There is, if you fail to provide a contract for an employee, they can go take that to an employment tribunal, regardless of whether they work for you or not. There is a remedy. The employment tribunal will force you to issue a contract of employment, and they will additionally award the employee somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks' salary by way of compensation. So it's not in your interests to not have a contract in place. And finally, tip 10, you need to be able to make the final hurdle. So what do I mean by that? Well, you've done all of this hard work. You've thought about the job role, the job description. You've attracted some great candidates and you've selected them in a very professional way. You've made your offer of appointment and you have the best person for the job. And it could all fall down on day one if you don't induct them to the business properly. So on day one, I strongly recommend that you get the administration sorted. Make clear what they need to do and know to be effective. And that involves you making the time to spend with your new employee to show them how to do the job. Who should they be introduced to, and what's the information they need to know, such as fire alarms, and how to deal with breaks, who to speak to if they're concerned about anything. And you will have identified some gaps through the interview process, so you won't have found the perfect person for your role. And it's a really good opportunity when they first join the company to talk about and give them some feedback from the interview and selection process, identifying the areas that you felt they still had work to do or still had some improvements to make. And that can form part of their development plan moving forward. So it's a good opportunity for you to talk through those things and get them moving in the right direction. I'd strongly recommend that you create a structured plan of induction and sign that off when done. So you will be issuing a contract or an offer letter to an employee, and it's highly likely that you'll be within that, giving them a probationary period. You need to formally sign off the probationary period once you feel that they've reached a satisfactory level. And the reason for that is that prior to their probation being served, they will not be relevant or apply within the disciplinary and grievance procedure. So if within a probationary period, an employee does something that's inappropriate or they're just not performing to the standard that you want, you can draw the contract to a close immediately by giving notice. Once somebody's completed their probationary period, then the disciplinary and grievance procedure will apply. And so it's really important that you draw a fine line and be clear about when that has happened. If your employee hasn't reached the level that you want them to, then you can extend your probationary period. But it would be inappropriate to do that if you haven't been having regular review meetings or letting people know how and what they need to do to improve. You can increase the induction period, the probation period, as many times as you want to. But in reality, a general rule of thumb is if you get to 12 months and your employee still isn't working at the level you require, then chances are it's appropriate to draw the employment to a close. And then finally, you need to plan to succeed. You don't want to have gone through all of this to have to do it all over again. And so by not interacting with your employee, by not giving them feedback or giving them a chance to succeed, you run every risk that in 2 months' time, your employee leaves because the job wasn't what they thought it was or they didn't feel supported, or you feel it's appropriate for the employee to go because they're just not coming up to the scratch or doing what you thought they would be doing when you decided you needed to recruit them. So really start thinking about planning to succeed from the outset. So to summarise, the 5 P's of successful recruitment. So prepare. So make sure that you've thought about what it is you want at the outset. Make sure that you've got a clear job description and you know what the skills are that you're looking for an employee. Create a plan using your timeline to make sure that you put aside the correct amount of time that you need and you follow your plan. And again, I've seen a number of times where we put a plan in place and then an employer decides to skip a step. And that can be fatal in terms of trying to find the right person for your business. So have a plan and stick to it. Have some clear processes in place. So we talked about having some interview questions, scoring candidates, and keeping your documented paperwork securely. So make sure that you've got a really clear process for selecting the best candidate and follow that process throughout and fairly with everybody. Protect yourself and make sure that you're not in breach of the law at any given point and that you're not discriminating against any candidate. Make sure that you've done the proper employment checks and that you are being a responsible employer. And finally, perform. So set out to succeed. You want your business to move forward. You want to achieve great things. And so you need to plan to do that. It won't happen by default.
Many thanks, Kate, for that insightful overview. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Our first question is from Rob Hunter, and he would like to know, where should I advertise my vacancy?
Well, I think when you're looking at where to advertise your vacancy, you really need to think about where your ideal candidates are going to be. So if you're looking for a retail job or a job in hospitality, it may well be that Facebook, LinkedIn, those sorts of places, you know, some of the basic jobs boards would be a great place to look. But if you're looking for a more technically competent role, such as an engineer, you may want to appoint an agent who specialises in that particular area. There are other ways to attract candidates. So using your website, you could have a page on there, and then you could be posting on LinkedIn and Facebook and pointing people towards your own website and getting people to apply that way.
Okay, thanks for that, Kate. Our second question is from Sarah Brown, and she's asking, how much can I expect to pay to recruit someone?
Well, that's entirely up to you. So you can manage the whole process yourself, and it costs you as little as your own time and the time of buying some very basic job board postings. People like Indeed will charge you on a pay per click and a pay per day. So it really is up to you. If you wanted to appoint an agent, then agency fees will run anywhere between 12 and 20% of your annual salary that you're looking to offer, depending on the level of role that you're looking for. But I would recommend, if you are going to appoint an agent, that you make sure that you understand the terms and conditions. So if your employee starts with you and they don't work out, that you do then go back to the agent and look to recover some of the costs based on the length of service of that individual employee. You can, if you want to, appoint somebody like myself who will sit alongside you and help you through the process, but allow you to manage some of it yourself, so you're learning the skills for the next time that you need to recruit somebody. So it really does depend, but start with a budget in mind and what's affordable for you, and then look to see what you can get for that budget.
Thanks, Kate. And then we have David Varney has commented about the fact that he has interviewed many times, or set up interviews many times, with people not turning up.
Yeah.
And even had gone through the interview process, and then people have not actually turned up for the offer of employment on the day.
Yeah, and I think that can be a challenge in terms of different types of roles. So I would always recommend, if you set up the interviews at the beginning of your recruitment process, I would set a couple of dates aside, and as part of your advert, make clear that these are the dates that you're going to be interviewing, and any applicant needs to be available on those particular dates. Once you've then set the interview with the applicant, I would always recommend that you potentially text them or email them a day before, just to remind them and check that everything's okay. I appreciate that's a lot of work on your part, but it may well be worth it for you. And again, staying in touch with somebody between having offered a job and them actually starting with your business is a really good way of getting them engaged and you know, effectively working with you before they even start.
Great, thanks for that, Kate. And looks like our final question for this session has come in from Jane Walker, and she's asking, how do I know which is the right contract to employ someone on?
Yeah, so contracts of employment are a whole other webinar, but certainly when you're thinking at the beginning what it is that you want, I think be realistic with what you can offer somebody. So there would be it would be very easy to say, I want to take somebody on, but actually my need is very short term. So my business is seasonal. So what you don't want to do is offer somebody a full-time permanent contract if you really can't see that work lasting for longer than 3 or 4 months. It may well then be better for you to take somebody on a temporary contract. And equally, if you can't guarantee somebody a number of hours each week, then please don't give them a contract that says that. So part of your responsibility as an employer is to make work available for somebody. So if you contract with them for 20 hours a week, you will need to provide them with 20 hours worth of work each week. If you can't guarantee that, then it may be worth you offering them less and then putting everything else onto additional hours or overtime. But I would strongly recommend that you get some HR support. Either find an HR specialist that can give you advice on the types of contracts that you should have and potentially write some contracts for you, or ACAS has got a really good website that you can have a look on, and they've also got a guide to recruiting people that may well be worth you having a look at.